Good morning. I'm so pleased to be able to share with you some of the things that I've learned about spiral dynamics. It's a model that is very complex. It's a lot to talk about, a lot of information, and I hope you'll join me in my upcoming class that I'm going to offer you. Today, I just want to give you some of the ideas of pieces of wisdom that I've received from studying spiral dynamics. And just basically, so if you're not familiar with it, it's a model, it's a map that shows how humans evolve in their lives, both individually and collectively. There's a parallel between the individual developmental levels and our collective consciousness and how we've developed in our thinking over the millennium that human beings have evolved on this earth. And so when we learn spiral dynamics, we learn about the collective evolution of our consciousness and our perception of the world. And we also can see how that is happening in our own personal lives. So today, some of the wisdom that I wanted to share with you was the incredible idea of including the values of previous developmental stages in our current worldview. And that's a huge challenge for human beings. Spiral dynamics shows us that what we often do is when we evolve or step into a more expansive worldview, we often will leave behind and absolutely reject all of the stuff, like throwing out the baby with the bathwater, throwing out the old healthy ideas because we're now in a new worldview. And we always think that this new worldview is better than the last one. So that idea of different versus better is a real dynamic thing for us to play with as we learn spiral dynamics. The idea of, let's use an example of, let's say you're a mom or a dad or a grandparent and you're watching your little ones grow up. Let's say you have a high school senior and a fifth grader and a kindergartner in your family, and you're raising all three of them: high school senior, fifth grader, and a kindergartner. You know, the kindergartner is just stepping out into a bigger world. The preschooler and the kindergartner is their leading edge is to learn social skills so that they can step out of their nuclear family and into a larger community of their preschool class or their kindergarten class. And they're learning to share and learning to listen and cooperate. And that's exactly the right thing for that little guy to learn to do at kindergarten. Now you have a fifth grader as well. They've learned all that stuff. They've bought into how to be in school and get along and play the game of conforming and fitting in, and they've learned that, and it feels like home. And by the fifth grade, they're ready to leave that elementary school and even move out into something even larger. A school, the whole school is their community, and now they're moving into, they have a much bigger world than the kindergarten sibling has. And their picture of the world is different. They have a less concrete, they're more stepping into abstract thinking or what ifs or judging the ethics of things in fifth grade. Kindergartners don't do that. And then there's a high school kid who is right at the edge of stepping out of that small world of high school into the bigger world of spreading their wings and trying something, maybe deciding to go to college or a community college and get some skills and start making a living for themselves, maybe moving out on their own. And they're stepping into a much bigger worldview than their fifth grade sibling and their kindergarten sibling. And as a mom or dad or grandparent or aunt or uncle or neighbor observing the children, you would never say the 12th grader, the high school senior, is better than the 5th grader. And you would never say the 5th grader is better than the kindergartner. It's not a matter of better or worse. You know the answer to that question. It's a matter of ability and maturity and worldview and skills and brain development. And none of them are better or worse than the other. They're right where they should be. If anything, all you can say is that they're different. They're different. And we also notice that as we raise our children, we give them different levels of responsibility. And we'll introduce a simple chore for the 5-year-old, and we'll introduce a more complex chore and a very high responsibility for the high school senior. They might be babysitting the 5th grader and the kindergartner. High levels of responsibility for those who have a wider worldview. All right. So this is some of the things that we notice as parents. No big deal. We get it. I'm asking you, and Spiral Dynamics asks us to do the same when it comes to people who are different than us. To realize the difference doesn't mean they're worse and I'm better. That's ego talking. And that's true. Ego is what happens all throughout our developmental levels. We are building and defining our personality and ourselves so we can thrive in the world. So the ego development is healthy and well and good and should be strong. So you have a good sense of yourself and you're healthy about yourself. And then as we're learning in our unity practice, it seems that what we really want to do is master that personality, to detach from identity as just the personality. We're being asked to be as the Christ in the world. So we're being asked to detach and master the personality so that we can be the love in the world. And part of that being the love is to stop judging both our previous levels and other worldviews than ours in the world. Just like the parents, we want ourselves to not judge ourselves if we're immature in some areas of our lives, but to love that part of us and focus on it and nurture it into health and maturity. And we're asking ourselves not to just judge and dismiss others who have a different worldview than ours. And we will do that so often, don't we? And you can think of multiple places right now in your mind is as I pause for a moment of where do you quickly jump into judgment against someone else or intolerance of diversity? Where do I judge someone else? Where do I not tolerate? What do I not tolerate? Wow, a lot of things probably came up. As I've thought about this question, I've thought about, well, look at how we've gone through so much lately when it came to how we handle ourselves through a pandemic and how we respond to an invitation to get vaccinated, and how even within our little church communities, we had diversity in that decision, which helped us to have some challenging conversations about when do we reopen our churches? How will we meet together? What will be our mask requirements, and etc.? Those have been questions that have given us opportunities to practice this integral practice of listening to someone else, not judging someone else. And that's what we do so often when we come from ego. So spiral dynamics teaches us to see the world in all its different levels and colors as a beautiful mix of diversity and growing. We're all growing together at the same time, just like the little family with the 3 kids at different levels. They're all growing together, and they all walk the journey together. Emily Cady, one of Unity's first writers, offered a series of magazine articles for Charles and Myrtle to publish in their very first magazine. They called it Modern Thought, which became the Unity magazine eventually. And Emily Cady wrote some wonderful articles that became Lessons in Truth, the seminal book that became the correspondence course for Unity ministers for 30 years. So, and from that chapter called Unity of the Spirit, I'd like to share a story that she tells. And you'll see that this is going to fit right into what I've been saying about spiral dynamics, realizing that our practice is to try to understand other worldviews as legitimate for that person at that time in their lives, and that for us to think that we have all the answers and there everyone else is wrong is where we get in trouble. Take a listen. She's talking about how we try to perceive God, and she says, were it not at times so utterly ridiculous, it would be always pitiful to see the human mind of man trying to limit God to personal comprehension, as though a finite being could ever completely encompass or comprehend the infinite. However much any one of us may know of God, there will always be unexplored fields in the realm of expression. And it is evidence of our narrow vision to say, this is all there is of God. So she gives an example. She says, suppose that a dozen persons are standing on the dark side of a wall in which there are various size openings. Viewing the scene outside through the opening assigned to him, one sees all there is within a certain radius. And he says, I see the whole world. There are trees and fields. And another, through a larger opening, has a more extended view. And he says, I see trees and fields and houses. I see the whole world. And the next one, looking through a still larger opening, exclaims, oh, you're all wrong. I alone see the whole world. I see trees and fields and houses and rivers and animals. The fact is, each one looking at the same world sees according to the size of the aperture through which he is looking, and he limits the world to just his own circumscribed view of it. You would say that such limitation was only a mark of each man's ignorance and narrowness. Each one would pity the man, everyone would pity the man who thus displayed, I fairly vaunted his ignorance. And then she goes on to talk about the schisms and the denominations and how we've all argued to say we alone can see God. And she says it's time to break down the dividing wall, which is a line that the Apostle Paul used in Ephesians, even as Christ does, breaking down differences and destroying misunderstanding. And she says, I want to help you see that there is no real wall of difference, except as what appears to you because of your circumscribed view. I want you to see that every time you try to limit God's manifestation of itself in any person or through any person in order to make that manifestation conform to what you see as truth, you are only crying loudly, "Ho, everyone, come and view my narrowness and my ignorance." I want to stimulate you to lose sight of all differences, all side issues and lesser things, and seek but for one thing, that is the consciousness of the presence of the indwelling God within your soul and life. And here, Emily Cady, in the late 1890s, is giving us a taste of the passion of someone who can see from the integral viewpoint. She's so aware of the one mission that we have, and that is to lose sight of our differences, to seek but one thing, and that is the indwelling God, the awareness, the consciousness of that oneness here, right now. And as I study spiral dynamics, I can't help but see that what spiral dynamics calls the second tier, that born again kind of place in terms of psychological, social, ego development, that place of letting go of thinking I'm the only one who's right, that place of being able to go back to my previous developmental stages and see the good in that stage, not to condemn it because it was immature, but to embrace the healthy of that stage and to integrate it into my worldview now, to be able to stop trying to say I'm right or convert others and to listen to them. We have so many things that we can argue about with other people: politics, spirituality, world chaos, tyrants, crooked governments, misled leaders, you name it. There's plenty for us to be upset with and discouraged about, and definitely to bring into prayer for peace and wholeness. But what's most important for us to do is the inside job, the responsibility of awakening to our wholeness, to the responsibility of awakening to the presence and power of God in our lives all the time. The responsibility is to be able to see the good in others, even if they have a different worldview than we do. To be able to see the good in someone who disagrees with us about a big issue in politics, about masking or vaccines or abortion or voting rights, or, oh my goodness, those issues that you don't dare talk about with others. What if you gave yourself permission to listen to them without defending your own self? The integral practice is for us to be able to listen to them and hear what they're saying because they're seeing it through their aperture, through the wall, the hole in the wall. Not to shut them off just because we believe they're wrong. Awakening is the bridge to seeing all the worldviews, to see them as legitimate for them and so valuable that you're willing to turn around and reincorporate those values into your life as well. Are there parts of the traditional worldview or the modern worldview that you have rejected that it is time to re-examine? It's just that we only see from our worldview, and it's just so hard to see from others' worldviews. So, and it reminds me of the Apostle Paul and another thing that Jesus said. Jesus said, I have so much to tell you, but you cannot bear it now. And he said that in John 16. He says, I have so much I want to tell you, but you cannot bear it now. And I think bear it or carry it or take it on. Jesus knew that he had such enlightened ideas, and he was talking to these people who just couldn't take it in. And just a decade or so later, the Apostle Paul, who never met Jesus but knew him mystically, said something else similar in 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter that we often like to read. Right after he describes and defines love, he says, for now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know just as I am known. And for millennium, we've wondered, what does that then mean? Then we shall see face to face. Then we shall be known. And traditional Christianity has, and all traditional religions would say, then is in the afterlife. But now I'm wondering, since I've learned spiral dynamics and I've learned about the integral practice, I'm thinking the then is now. Is this awakening that the whole world is jostling itself through? This chaos that we have produced in the world is because we are awakening to beyond ego. And when we awaken to a world beyond ego, where we master ego, use it for the glory of God, or to say it another way, use it to shine our light into the world, when we are awakening to mastering ego and using it to shine our radiance into the world, then we're stepping into this knowing face to face who God is and what our potential is. I invite you to be like the parent of 3 children of different levels, to be like the Jesus that we love, who can see the people around him with love and know that they can't see the world the way he can see them, and still pull them in, nurture them, teach them what they can handle, and show them the respect that they deserve, because they're not worse, we're not better, we're all just different, and we're walking this journey together. I invite you to learn more about how you can break down your prejudices, your prejudgments, to let go of judgment when you see others and see them with a purity of respect and value for where they're at. And so I'd like to leave you with an affirmation that we can say together. This affirmation came from Linda Martella Whitsett, who wrote a couple books that I just love, How to Pray Without Talking to God, as well as Divine Audacity, which is the one I'm referring to now. I use Divine Audacity when I teach 12 Powers, and I have it here on my desk so often because I'll want to pull it out and read her meditations to myself when I meditate. And in the section about faith, which is the perceiving power of the mind, faith is so important when we use our imaginations. They go side by side together, the imagination and faith, when we are trying to see past the chaos, past the hatred, past the judgment, past the destruction, past the sickness, when we are trying to see a world renewed and at peace, we are using faith and imagination. In this affirmation, she writes, it just brings us to remembering to affirm that it's all unfolding in perfect order. Here's the affirmation. I'll say it in short sections so you can repeat after me, and say it aloud after me so you can feel it in your chest. I live in faith. I perceive the good. I trust all is well. And I expect the best. Remember, the best is not always the best for you. The emphasis here is to expect the best. Expect the best, letting go of judgment. Let's say it again. I live in faith. I perceive the good. I trust all is well. I expect the best. And so it is. Namaste.